Is it?
8:55.
Okay, and this brings us to Watergate. Watergate, the cover-up of Watergate, what happened was 5 guys, I told you about it being bugged, right? The Watergate almost being bugged. 5 of the guys who were part of this found out that the bugs had gone bad. So one night they broke back in. This wasn't the first time they had broken in, but they broke back in to the headquarters and were fixing the bugs or putting in new bugs. I can't remember which one it was. And I think it was an off-duty police officer saw something suspicious, like lights, you know. It was Forrest Gump, right? And so anyway, they get caught. How many of you guys have ever been watching, usually on Fox News a lot, it's a bald guy with a giant mustache. He's always selling like gold stuff. His name is G. Gordon Liddy. You know who I'm talking about, don't you, Andrew? He's like, yes, we have pictures of him. Mr. Fields used to have a picture of G. Gordon Liddy, a signed picture of G. Gordon Liddy in his office. G. Gordon Liddy was one of the guys who broke in and got arrested. He went to federal prison. He used to work for the CIA. He was what we call a true believer. There used to be a thing at parties. He would hold his hand into a flame, and people would say, "What's the trick?" And he would say, "There is no trick." Well, how do you do that? There's no trick. You just have to not mind the pain. And he could just keep his hand on a flame. But he was a true believer. He went to jail. He's considered a conservative icon now for having gone down with the ship and not ratted out. Oh God, Hunter's here.
Yeah,
how was the paper,
finishing
Hunter?
your paper. This was fun.
My great grandmother died. Thank you.
Why is everyone dying?
Because that generation is time for them to get.
I'm sorry. My insensitivity is actually on camera now. Sorry.
Do you want me to cover it up by saying that I'm going to be the next President Nixon?
So they go to jail. So anyway, they get arrested, and there were these 2 guys. Actually, one guy named Bob Woodward who worked for the Washington Post. He was a young reporter. Today, he's considered one of the most respected reporters in our country. Bob Woodward started investigating into this, and then a guy that also worked for the Post named Carl Bernstein started in. Woodward and Bernstein are the writers who are going to end up breaking the Watergate scandal, breaking it wide open. And what Watergate was, the break-in stuff was the bad stuff, but what they were able to do was connect the people who broke into the Watergate to the White House. And found out that Nixon, while he obviously did not, he never ordered anything specific. I want you to do this. But he found out about what went wrong and he ordered a cover-up. And that's what the Watergate thing was about, was ordering a cover-up. How much did you know and when did you know it? There was a guy, and you're going to laugh at the name, but he actually was inside the FBI and he saw what was going on and he didn't like it. And he was giving Woodward information. And he would not divulge his name. He just went by a name called Deep Throat. And that's all he went. And he would meet like in a garage and he would give information to Woodward and he would use it in his investigations to try to find more out about Watergate. He remained secret. Woodward and Bernstein would never reveal his identity until about 4 years ago. He actually revealed himself. And Woodward and Bernstein confirmed. It was a guy named Mark Felt. He literally was the deputy director of the FBI and he was giving Woodward this information. And people today had this big conversation. Is this guy a hero for showing all of this, corruption? Or was he not loyal? Dun, dun, dun.
Not loyal. We should have gotten rid of him. He's going against Creep.
The plumbers were people who worked for Creep and they did dirty jobs. That was what they did. But what Nixon was trying to cover up, the Watergate stuff was small potatoes. What he was trying to cover up was the stuff he was scared of people really knowing about. And that was his enemies list. When he was having the FBI spy on people he didn't like in America, having the IRS audit people he didn't like, have the NSA listen and spy on people. Literally American citizens like senators and Supreme Court justices and presidents of universities and every black member of Congress, he was having the federal government spy on them. If you're curious, that's illegal. And what Watergate was an attempt to cover that up so they couldn't get to the big stuff. So, what ends up happening is eventually they find out that Nixon had been taping every one of his conversations in the Oval Office since he's been there. And
Doesn't seem like a good decision.
well, he wasn't going to. Kennedy did the same thing. Kennedy's was for posterity, right? It was history. I mean, he's making history, and he wanted people to hear it. Nixon's was a little bit more so we could get you, right? So we knew what was going on and whatnot, and it kind of came back and bit him. But I think part of it was probably history for him, too. But if you're doing bad stuff, you should turn off the button.
Yeah.
That being said, he didn't. He didn't. And by 1973, by late 73, there was a committee, a Congressional House committee investigating this. And it was on the TV all the time. What people knew, bringing people in and being subpoenaed, going in front of the Congressional Committee. What did you know? When did you know it? Linking it back to the White House. And one of the attorneys who worked for the White House named Archibald Cox. Well, he was going to testify to Congress and essentially sink the president. So the president fired him and all those associated with him. It was called the Saturday Night Massacre. So he couldn't actually testify as a government official.
It's not obvious at all.
Well, that too, but...
You can fire, the president can fire anybody who works for him if he wants to. He can fire the Secretary of State right now if he wants to.
But like firing someone because
Yeah,
Well, at this point, Nixon was becoming desperate.
irrational.
And then the Congressional Committee subpoenas the Oval Office tapes. And there was a huge debate back and forth between Congress and the presidency. And the president said, no, you do not get these. And he cited something called executive privilege. The president has to be allowed to he has to be able to talk to advisors and get candid information in the Oval Office without always having Congress breathing down his neck, is what he argued. Whether it's foreign policy, whether it's domestic policy, whether it's anything, the president has the right to say whatever he wants in the Oval Office. Well, Congress disagreed with him, and it went to court. And my favorite court case name ever, U.S. versus Nixon. Actually, my favorite court case name ever is Bush versus Gore. Like, how big is that, right?
I don't know. I like the one versus Atkins.
Yeah,
Atkins versus Children's Hospital.
Oh, Atkins versus...
That's my favorite one because it sounds like Atkins is the worst person ever.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, you can't win.
Conceded.
Yeah.
So anyway, in U.S. versus Nixon, the Supreme Court did not hold the executive privilege argument to be a persuasive one and ordered the tapes to be handed over. At which point, the tapes were handed over, except for 19 minutes of one tape was missing. And they were like, we need these 19 minutes. And Nixon was like, no, you don't get these 19 minutes.
You could have just said like, I'm sorry, I don't know where they went.
Right, the dog ate these 19 minutes. Holmes.
Not for the
Fired the Oval Office.
So anyway, by this point, the country's becoming obsessed with this. And the government's not really moving forward. He finally hands over the 19 minutes. And when he does, on July 30th, 1977, the House draws up impeachment charges. They don't ever vote. Nixon was not impeached, nor was he convicted. And on August 6th or August 7th, Nixon went on television and he officially resigned, effective noon the next day. And the next morning he got in his helicopter and he went away. Now, when Ford became president, I'll stop here in a second, when Ford became president, the first thing, or one of the first things he did was pardon Nixon for any crimes he may have committed. In doing so, two things were important. Number one, people thought, first of all, why wasn't it Spiro Agnew? Why didn't he become president? He had also resigned because of tax evasion. So Ford was House Majority Leader. Nixon had him become vice president. He appointed him to be vice president. So Ford becomes president, having never been on a national ticket. He becomes president by winning a district in Michigan. And people think there was a dirty deal, that when he made Ford vice president, he said, I'll make you vice president so long as if I resign, you will pardon me. That was never, we don't know any information if that's true, but that was sort of the scuttlebutt. Also, when he pardoned Nixon, Ford pretty much threw away any chance that he was ever going to get elected. Because America was pissed. They wanted answers. Nixon never had to answer for himself. There was a movie that came out a couple of years ago called Frost Nixon. Frost was a British reporter, and he interviewed Nixon, and it was highly watched because America wanted Nixon to admit that he had done something wrong. And he never admitted that he never admitted the big stuff. He came pretty close in the Frost-Nixon debates, but he never admitted what Americans wanted him to. And he's kind of gone down as really a polarizing figure in American history because he did some pretty incredible things, but he was also totally paranoid. He clearly did a lot of illegal stuff and abused his power.
It's only illegal if you get caught, Mr. Sayre.
Yeah.
Nixon argued, though, that the president, theoretically speaking, cannot commit crimes. Why not? If you have pardon power, then theoretically you can pardon yourself. So Nixon argued that, theoretically speaking, legally, the president cannot be shackled by legal restrictions.
And the people elected you there gave you the pardon power, so they shouldn't theoretically.
Well, I don't think if you ask the American public, are you okay with this person being above the law?
Yeah, but theoretically.
Well, he was the first president to ever make that comment, though. And Nixon liked power quite a bit. He really loved being president. And he is, over time, people have become a little bit less vitriolic, is that a word? Towards him. It was the late 70s and 80s, people really hated Nixon. It's not as bad, I think, today. He's dead. In that time. So anyway, tomorrow we'll talk about the imperial president. Oh, we got pretty far today. Tomorrow, there's a chance we might get to the 80s.
Right.
Yes. 80s.